Before David ever wore a crown, he learned how to survive being hunted, rejected, and underestimated. Welcome. Tonight, we are going to follow, in a clear and factual way, the life of David as it is presented in the biblical record, primarily in the books of 1 Samuel, 2 Samuel, and early 1 Kings. This will not be a symbolic retelling or a poetic interpretation. We will move step by step through real events, real decisions, and real consequences. Every stage of his life will be treated as part of a continuous chain, where one choice leads directly into the next outcome. The goal is simple: to understand how David's life actually unfolded and why each moment mattered. We will begin in Bethlehem, during a time when Israel was still unstable under the leadership of King Saul. David appears in the record as the youngest son of Jesse, a role that carried little expectation of influence or leadership. From there, we will follow the moment when the prophet Samuel arrives and unexpectedly anoints him. This was not a public rise to power. It was a quiet selection that did not immediately change David's position, but it marked the beginning of a process that would unfold over many years. This matters because David did not become king quickly. There was a long period where nothing seemed to change externally, even though everything had already changed internally and spiritually. From that point, we will move into the well-known confrontation with Goliath, not as an isolated heroic moment, but as a turning point that brought David into national attention. This event placed him inside the royal structure, where he would begin serving King Saul. At first, David was valued. He played music to calm Saul, and he proved himself in battle, but this period did not remain stable. We will carefully follow how public recognition began to shift the dynamic between David and Saul, leading to jealousy, suspicion, and eventually open hostility. As we continue, we will track the years in which David lived as a fugitive. This phase is often simplified, but in reality it involved complex movements between territories, alliances with different groups, and constant strategic decisions to stay alive. David was not only running, he was organizing men, managing resources, and making choices that would later define his leadership. This period includes encounters with priests, foreign rulers, and even moments where David had the opportunity to kill Saul but chose not to. Each of these moments had direct consequences, shaping how others viewed him and how his future authority would be established. Then we will move into the transition of power after Saul's death. David does not immediately take control of all Israel. Instead, there is a divided kingdom, internal conflict, and a gradual consolidation of authority. We will follow how he becomes king first over Judah, and only later over all Israel. From there, we will examine the establishment of Jerusalem as a political and religious center, along with military expansions and administrative decisions that stabilize the nation. However, this story does not remain a steady rise. A central part of David's life includes moral failure, particularly in the episode involving Bathsheba. We will not treat this briefly or symbolically. We will examine what happened, why it mattered, and how it affected his family and his kingdom. This moment leads directly into a series of internal conflicts, including rebellion within his own household. These events are essential to understanding the full scope of his reign, because they show that his greatest challenges did not always come from external enemies, but from the consequences of his own actions. Few people stop to consider that David's life is not divided neatly between before king and after king. The same path through decision-making, risk, and consequence exist in both phases. In fact, many of the qualities that allowed him to survive as a fugitive later influenced how he governed as a king. This matters because it reveals that his leadership was not formed in comfort or stability, but under continuous tension and uncertainty. So the central question we will carry through this entire journey is simple and direct. How did each stage of David's life prepare him for what came next? And what were the real consequences of the decisions he made along the way? If you appreciate this kind of structured, fact-based storytelling, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to the channel. It helps the content reach more people who are looking for clarity and depth. And before we continue, leave a comment telling me where you are watching from and what time it is there. Also include these. Which part of David's life are you most interested in understanding more deeply? The rise, the exile, or the reign? Now we begin at the starting point. Before recognition, before conflict, and before any public role, when David was simply the youngest son in Bethlehem, and no one expected what would happen next. Act 1. The unexpected choice. David's story begins in Bethlehem, a small town in the territory of Judah, during a period when Israel was still under the unstable leadership of King Saul. At this point, Saul had already been chosen as the first king, but his reign was deteriorating due to repeated acts of disobedience recorded in 1 Samuel. This matters because the rise of David does not happen in a vacuum. It begins in response to a leadership crisis at the national level. According to the text, God had rejected Saul as king, but Saul remained in power for a significant period. This created a unique situation. Israel still had a king, but a successor had already been chosen in advance. The prophet Samuel plays a central role in this transition. He is instructed to go to Bethlehem, to the house of Jesse, and anoint one of his sons as the future king. This journey is not presented as a public political move, but as a discreet mission. Samuel even expresses concern for his safety, because if Saul were to discover that a new king was being anointed, it could be interpreted as treason. This detail shows the level of tension already present in the kingdom. When Samuel arrives in Bethlehem, the elders of the town react with fear, asking if he comes in peace. This indicates that prophetic visits were often associated with judgment or serious national matters. Jesse presents his sons to Samuel, starting with the eldest, Eliab. From a human perspective, Eliab appears to be the obvious choice. He has the physical presence and characteristics expected of a leader. However, the text makes a clear distinction at this point. Samuel is told not to judge by appearance, because the selection is based on criteria that are not visible externally. One by one, Jesse's sons pass before Samuel, and each time the answer is the same: they are not the chosen one. This process continues until all the sons who were initially brought forward have been evaluated. At these moments, it becomes clear that someone is missing. Samuel asks Jesse if these are all his sons, and Jesse responds that the youngest is still out in the fields, tending sheep. This detail is important because it establishes David's initial position within the family. He is not present at the selection process, not because of absence by chance, but because his role is considered secondary. He is assigned to work that keeps him physically distant from the main event. This reflects how he was viewed at the time: reliable for tasks, but not expected to lead. David is then called in from the field. The description given is brief, but specific. He is noted for his appearance. But the emphasis quickly shifts to the decision itself. The instruction is immediate. Samuel is told to anoint him, because this is the one. There is no delay, no further evaluation, and no negotiation. The decision is final. Samuel anoints David in the presence of his brothers, and the text states that from that day forward, the Spirit of the Lord came powerfully upon him. This marks the true beginning of David's rise, but it does not produce any immediate visible change in his status. This is a critical point in understanding the structure of David's life. He is anointed as the future king, but he does not become king at this time. There is no transition of power, no public announcement, and no shift in responsibility. After the anointing, David returns to his previous role. He goes back to tending sheep. This matters because it shows that the process between selection and fulfillment is extended and requires endurance. The anointing establishes direction, but not immediate position. At the same time, a parallel development is taking place with King Saul. The text indicates that the Spirit of the Lord departs from Saul, and he begins to experience distressing episodes. These episodes affect his ability to function as a stable leader. His servant suggests bringing in someone who can play music to calm him during these moments. This leads to the introduction of David into Saul's court. It is not through political ambition or strategic placement, but through a practical need that David is brought closer to the center of power. David is recommended as someone skilled in playing the harp, but the description given about him includes more than just musical ability. He is also described as capable, brave, and having good judgment. This suggests that even at this early stage, his reputation includes qualities beyond his current role. When David begins to serve Saul, his music provides relief during Saul's distress. As a result, Saul develops an initial level of trust and appreciation for him. David is given a position as an armor-bearer, which places him in close proximity to the king. This phase of David's life is defined by contrast. On one side, he has already been anointed as the future king. On the other, he is serving the current king in a supportive role, with no outward indication of his future position. This creates a situation where David must operate within a system that he will eventually replace, without acting against it prematurely. This matters because it establishes a pattern that will repeat throughout his life. He is placed in positions where he must wait, observe, and act with restraint. At this point, David is inside the royal environment, but he is not yet a central figure in national events. That will change with the next major development, a military confrontation that will bring him into direct public attention. The shift from private selection to public recognition will happen quickly, but it will also introduce new risks that will shape everything that follows. Act 2. From obscurity to national attention. At this point, David is already moving between two environments: the royal court, where he serves King Saul, and Bethlehem, where he continues to fulfill his responsibilities as a shepherd. This dual role matters because it shows that his position is still not fully established. He is known to Saul, but he is not yet a central figure in military or political decisions. That will change with a conflict that begins to develop between Israel and the Philistines, a recurring enemy throughout this period. The Philistines gather their forces in a region known as the Valley of Elah, a strategic location that allows control over key routes between territories. Saul responds by assembling the Israelite army, and both sides position themselves on opposing hills, creating a standoff. This is not an immediate battle. Instead, it becomes a prolonged confrontation when neither side advances. This kind of military situation often leads to psychological pressure, where one side attempts to break the morale of the other before engaging directly. At the center of this tension is a Philistine champion named Goliath from the city of Gath. The biblical text provides detailed measurements of his height and describes his armor and weapons, emphasizing his physical advantage and combat experience. This description is not incidental. It establishes the scale of the challenge. Goliath steps forward daily, issuing a direct challenge to the Israelite army. Instead of a full battle, he proposes single combat. One representative from Israel would fight him, and the outcome would determine the result for both sides. This challenge is repeated for 40 days. Each time, the effect is the same: fear and hesitation among the Israelite forces. No one steps forward to accept it. This includes Saul, who, as king, would be expected to lead in such a situation. The delay matters because it shows that the issue is not just physical strength, but the inability to respond under pressure. The army is present, but inactive. David is not initially part of this military setting. He is sent by his father Jesse to bring food to his older brothers, who are serving in Saul's army. This detail is important because it shows that David's arrival at the battlefield is not intentional in a strategic sense. He comes as a messenger, not as a soldier. When he reaches the camp, he leaves the supplies with a keeper and goes to the front lines to speak with his brothers. It is at this moment that he hears Goliath's challenge for the first time. David's reaction is immediate and different from those around him. While the soldiers focus on the danger, David focuses on the meaning of the challenge. He asks questions about what will be done for the man who defeats Goliath. But more importantly, he frames the situation in terms of defiance against Israel and its God. This shift in perspective matters because it explains why he's willing to act when others are not. He is not ignoring the risk. He is interpreting the situation differently. His older brother Eliab responds negatively, accusing David of arrogance and questioning his motives. This reaction reflects internal tension within the family and also reinforces how David is still perceived inexperienced and out of place in a military environment. However, David does not engage in a prolonged argument. He continues gathering information, speaking to others in the camp. His questions and confidence begin to circulate, eventually reaching Saul. When David is brought before Saul, the initial response is dismissive. Saul points out the obvious difference. David is young and has no formal experience in warfare, while Goliath has been a trained fighter for years. This is a practical assessment based on observable facts. David responds by presenting evidence from his past, not in terms of military campaigns, but in terms of personal experience. He describes situations where he protected his flock from predators, specifically a lion and a bear, and explains how he acted decisively in those moments. This response is significant because it reveals how David interprets experience. He does not separate his time as a shepherd from his ability to confront Goliath. Instead, he sees continuity between those events. He frames his actions not only as personal effort, but as outcomes influenced by divine support. This matters because it establishes the basis for his confidence not in his own strength alone, but in a pattern he believes will continue. Saul eventually allows David to face Goliath, but not without attempting to equip him with armor and weapons. David tries them, but quickly recognizes that they are not suitable for him. He removes them and returns to what he is familiar with: a staff, a sling, and stones collected from a nearby stream. This decision is practical, not symbolic. It shows that David chooses to operate within his proven capabilities, rather than adopting unfamiliar methods under pressure. As David approaches the battlefield, the situation shifts from a prolonged standoff to an imminent confrontation. Goliath sees him and reacts with contempt, focusing on David's youth and lack of traditional weaponry. This reaction reinforces the imbalance between them. However, David's response is direct and grounded in the same perspective he expressed earlier. He identifies the confrontation not just as a personal duel, but as a representation of a larger conflict. At this point, both sides are fully engaged in the moment. The army that had been passive for 40 days is now watching a single encounter that will determine the outcome of the standoff. The tension is no longer theoretical. It is immediate, and the next actions will resolve a situation that has remained unresolved for weeks. The outcome of this encounter will not only end the standoff, but it will also shift David's position permanently. What happens next will move him from relative obscurity into national recognition, creating a new phase in his life that brings both opportunity and risk. The confrontation between David and Goliath moves quickly from verbal exchange to action, and the speed of this transition matters because it prevents the situation from returning to hesitation. Goliath advances, expecting a conventional fight. His equipment: helmet, armor, spear, and sword indicates close combat. David, however, does not change his approach. He closes the distance while preparing his sling, staying within the method he has already tested in past situations. This is not improvisation. It is execution under pressure using familiar skill. As David runs forward, he selects a stone, places it in the sling, and releases it with precision. The text describes the result directly. The stone strikes Goliath in the forehead, penetrating and causing him to fall face down. This detail is important because it shows that the outcome is immediate. There is no prolonged struggle. The imbalance that appeared at the beginning Sizes armor experience is resolved in a single decisive moment. This matters because it shifts the perception of what determines victory in this context. David does not stop after the initial impact. He moves toward Goliath, takes the Philistine's own sword, and ensures the outcome is final. This action has a practical purpose. It removes any doubt about the result and also sends a clear signal to both armies. The confrontation is over, the representative of the Philistines has been defeated. And according to the original challenge, this determines the direction of the larger conflict. The reaction is immediate. The Philistine army begins to retreat, and the Israelite forces, which had remained inactive for 40 days, now advance and pursue them. This shift matters because it shows how a single event can reverse the psychological state of an entire army. The same soldiers who hesitated now act decisively, not because their strength changed, but because the situation has been resolved in their favor. The victory extends beyond the duel. It becomes a broader military advantage as Israel pushes the Philistines back and secures the area. After the battle, David returns with tangible evidence of what happened, carrying Goliath's head. This detail, while direct, serves a purpose within the narrative. It confirms the outcome publicly and leaves no room for uncertainty. Saul, observing these events, asks about David's identity. This question is notable because David had already served in Saul's court. The most consistent interpretation is that Saul recognizes the individual but now seeks to understand his background more fully, given the significance of what has just occurred. David is brought before Saul again, and this time, the context is different. He is no longer just a musician or an armor bearer providing support. He is now the one who resolved a national-level crisis. This changes how he is perceived, not only by Saul, but by the entire structure around the king. His actions have moved him from a supportive role into a position of visible importance. This moment marks a clear transition. Before this event, David operated mostly in private or within limited circles. After this, his name becomes known across Israel. However, this visibility introduces a new factor that had not been present before. Comparison. As people begin to speak about what happened, David's success is measured alongside Saul's leadership. This matters because it creates the conditions for tension that will develop in the next phase. At this point, the immediate outcome is positive. Israel has secured a victory. David has gained recognition and is positioned within the royal environment. But the consequences of this recognition are not fully visible yet. The same event that elevates David will also begin to alter how Saul sees him. The shift from victory to tension will not happen all at once, but it has already started. What follows will show how public recognition can change relationships at the highest level of leadership. After the victory over Goliath, David does not return to obscurity. Instead, he remains within the royal structure, and his role begins to expand. This matters because the transition is not only about recognition, but about proximity to power. Saul keeps David with him and does not allow him to return permanently to his father's house. This decision places David in a continuous position of visibility, where his actions and reputation will be observed closely by both the king and the people. At the same time, a significant relationship begins to form between David and Jonathan, Saul's son. The text describes a strong bond between them, based on mutual respect and shared values. Jonathan recognizes David's character and actions, and he responds by giving him personal items, including his robe and weapons. This gesture is not symbolic in a vague sense. It reflects a transfer of honor and acknowledgement of David's growing importance. This matters because Jonathan is the natural heir to Saul's throne, yet he aligns himself with David without resistance. David is then assigned military responsibilities. Saul places him over groups of soldiers, and David begins to lead in active campaigns. The outcomes of these missions are consistently successful, and the text emphasizes that he acts with wisdom in his decisions. This combination, military success and disciplined behavior, strengthens his position further. It is not a single event that defines him anymore, but a pattern of effective action over time. As a result, he gains favor not only with Saul's servants, but also with the broader population. However, this growing recognition introduces a new dynamic. As David and the army return from battle, a public response emerges in the form of songs. Women from different cities come out to celebrate, and they repeat a phrase that compares Saul and David directly. Saul has slain his thousands, and David is tens of thousands. This comparison is critical because it introduces a measurable contrast between the king and the rising figure within his own system. Saul's reaction is immediate and negative. He interprets the comparison not as celebration, but as a threat. The statement suggests that David's achievements are surpassing his own, and Saul begins to project this into the future, asking what remains except the kingdom itself. This moment marks the beginning of a shift in perception. David is no longer just a successful servant, he becomes a potential rival in Saul's mind. This matters because it changes how every future action will be interpreted. From this point forward, Saul's behavior toward David becomes unstable. The text describes episodes where Saul is again distressed, and during one of these moments, while David is playing music as before, Saul throws a spear at him. This is not a symbolic act, it's a direct attempt to kill him. David avoids the attack, but the incident establishes a new reality. The king now sees him as an enemy. Despite this, David does not immediately leave the court. He continues to operate within the same environment, even as the risk increases. Saul then shifts from direct action to a more calculated approach. Instead of attacking David openly, he assigns him to dangerous military tasks, with the expectation that he will be killed in battle. This strategy allows Saul to remove David without appearing responsible. However, the outcome does not align with Saul's intention. David continues to succeed, and each mission increases his reputation further. This matters because the attempt to eliminate him indirectly produces the opposite effect. It strengthens his position instead of weakening it. At the same time, Saul offers his daughter in marriage to David, attaching conditions that involve further military risk. Again, the expectation is that David will fail. Instead, David completes the requirements and marries into the royal family. This development ties him even more closely to Saul's household, making the situation more complex. He is now both a valued leader and a perceived threat, integrated into the same structure that is beginning to reject him. By the end of this phase, the tension is no longer hidden. Saul's perception of David has fully changed, and his actions are increasingly driven by fear and suspicion. David, on the other hand, continues to act within his assigned roles, without initiating rebellion or withdrawal. This contrast matters because it defines the next transition, the movement from tension within the court to open pursuit outside of it. What began as recognition after a single victory has now developed into a conflict at the highest level of leadership. The consequences of this shift will force David out of the royal environment and into a new phase where survival becomes the primary concern. At Tisa stage, the situation between Saul and David is no longer unstable in a subtle way. It becomes openly defined. Saul begins to act with clear intent, and the text states directly that he now fears David. This fear is not based on a single event, but on a pattern he cannot control. David's continued success, the loyalty he is gaining, and the recognition he receives from the people. This matters because Saul's decisions are no longer strategic, they are reactive, driven by the perception that his position is being threatened. Saul eventually moves from indirect attempts to explicit orders. He instructs his servants and his son Jonathan to kill David. This marks a critical shift, because the intention is no longer hidden behind assignments or conditions. It is stated openly. However, Jonathan does not follow through with this command. Instead, he warns David and speaks to Saul on his behalf, reminding him of David's actions, his loyalty, and the fact that he had risked his life to bring victory to Israel. This intervention matters because it temporarily interrupts the escalation and reveals that not everyone within Saul's circle shares his perspective. For a short time, Saul listens. David is brought back into the court, and the situation appears to stabilize. He resumes his role, and the immediate threat seems to pass. But this stability is not permanent. The underlying issue, Saul's fear and perception, has not been resolved. When conflict with the Philistines arises again, David once more leads successfully in battle. This repeated pattern reinforces the same dynamic that triggered Saul's reaction earlier. Success continues to produce suspicion instead of trust. Another episode follows where Saul, again in a distressed state, attempts to kill David with a spear while he is in the court. This second attempt confirms that the earlier reconciliation has failed. The environment is no longer safe for David. This matters because it forces a decision point. Remaining in the same position now carries immediate and repeated risk. David escapes, and this marks the beginning of a new phase in his life. David returns to his home, but the threat follows him. Saul sends men to watch his house with the intention of killing him. At this point, David's wife, Michal, Saul's daughter, plays a decisive role. She warns David and helps him escape during the night, using a method to delay Saul's messengers by creating the appearance that David is still inside. This action allows David to gain distance before the order can be carried out. This matters because it shows that even within Saul's household, there are divisions, and David's survival now depends on quick decisions and support from those willing to act. After escaping, David goes to Samuel at Ramah. This is a return to the figure who had anointed him, and it represents a moment of temporary refuge. However, Saul continues the pursuit, sending messengers multiple times. Each group sent experiences an interruption, described in the text as being overcome by a prophetic state, preventing them from carrying out the order. Finally, Saul goes himself, and the same thing happens to him. This sequence delays the pursuit but does not end it. The intent remains unchanged. At this point, David leaves Ramah and seeks out Jonathan. Their meeting is direct and focused. David questions why Saul is trying to kill him, indicating that from his perspective, he has not acted against the king. Jonathan initially struggles to accept the full extent of Saul's intent, but through a planned test, they confirm that Saul's decision is final. This leads to a separation between David and Jonathan, marked by an agreement and a recognition that their paths will diverge for an extended period. This moment closes the current phase of David's life. He is no longer operating within the royal structure, and he no longer has protection from within it. The shift is complete, from a recognized and rising figure inside the kingdom to a target being actively pursued by the king himself. This transition matters because it changes the nature of every decision David will make from this point forward. The focus is no longer advancement. It is survival. What began as a single act of courage on the battlefield has now resulted in a complete reversal of position. David has gained recognition, formed alliances, and proven his ability, but he has also become the object of sustained pursuit. The next phase will take him outside the system entirely, where he will have to navigate unfamiliar territory, build support under pressure, and remain alive while being hunted. The movement from public success to forced exile is now complete. What follows will define how David adapts when he no longer has a place within the structure he once served. Act 3. Survival in exile. Once David leaves the protection of the royal court, his situation changes immediately and completely. He is no longer operating within a structured environment where roles are defined and resources are provided. Instead, he becomes a moving target with limited support and no stable base. This matters because every decision he makes from this point forward must account for uncertainty, limited information, and the constant risk of being located by Saul's forces. David's first recorded stop after separating from Jonathan is Nob, a city associated with priests. He goes to Ahimelech, the priest, and requests provisions. The interaction is tense from the beginning. Ahimelech is surprised to see David alone, without a formal military escort, which would normally accompany someone of his status. David responds by giving a partial explanation, stating that he is on a mission from the king. This detail is important because it shows that David is already adapting his communication based on the situation. He is not providing full transparency, likely to avoid placing others at risk or exposing his position. Ahimelech provides David with consecrated bread, which was normally reserved for priests, due to the urgency of the situation. This action reflects both necessity and flexibility within the circumstances. David also requests a weapon, and the only one available is the sword of Goliath, which had been kept there. This is significant because it connects back to the earlier event that elevated David's status. Now, that same symbol becomes a practical resource for survival. This matters because it shows how past events continue to influence present conditions in tangible ways. However, this visit has consequences that are not immediately visible. A man named Doeg, the Edomite, who serves Saul, is present and observes the interaction. This detail is brief, but it becomes critical later. It shows that even in moments where David is seeking basic support, there are elements that can carry information back to Saul. The environment is not neutral, and David cannot fully control who witnesses his movements. After leaving Nob, David continues to move, and his next decision introduces a new level of risk. Egois to Gath, a Philistine city, the same region associated with Goliath. This is not an obvious or safe choice. It suggests that David is attempting to place distance between himself and Saul by moving into territory where Saul's direct authority does not apply. However, this also means entering an environment where he is not trusted and may be recognized. The risk becomes real when the servants of Achish, the king of Gath, identify David. They recall the songs that had been sung about him, specifically the comparison between Saul and David's victories. This matters because it shows that David's reputation has extended beyond Israel. His past success, which brought him recognition at home, now creates danger in foreign territory. The same information that elevated him now exposes him. David recognizes the threat and adjusts his behavior quickly. He pretends to be mentally unstable, acting in a way that would make him appear harmless or not worth engaging. The text describes him altering his behavior in visible ways, leading Achish to dismiss him rather than detain or kill him. This decision allows David to leave Gath safely. This matters because it demonstrates a different kind of response under pressure, not confrontation, but strategic adaptation based on the environment. After leaving Gath, David goes to the Cave of Adullam. This location becomes the starting point of a new phase, where he's no longer alone. People begin to gather around him, those who are in distress, in debt, or dissatisfied with their current situation. This group grows, and David becomes their leader. This is not a formal army, but it is the beginning of an organized structure. The individuals who join him are not established soldiers. They are people looking for direction and stability. This development is important because it marks a shift from individual survival to group responsibility. David is no longer making decisions only for himself. He now has to consider the safety, movement, and provision of others. This changes the scale of his operations and introduces new challenges. Leading a group under pursuit requires coordination, planning, and discipline, even without the resources of a formal system. At this point, David also takes steps to protect his family. He brings his parents to the king of Moab, asking for them to stay there for safety. This decision reflects an understanding of risk distribution. By relocating his family, he reduces the number of immediate vulnerabilities he must manage while moving with his group. This matters because it shows that his decisions are not reactive, alone they include forward planning under pressure. As David settles temporarily in the stronghold, a message comes through the prophet Gad, instructing him not to remain there but to return to the land of Judah. This instruction redirects his movement back into the territory where Saul operates. This is significant because it increases the level of risk again. However, David follows this direction, indicating that his decisions are influenced not only by immediate safety, but also by guidance he considers authoritative. By the end of this phase, David is no longer a lone fugitive moving unpredictably. He has become the leader of a growing group, operating within and around territories where he can be pursued. His position is more defined, but also more exposed. The consequences of his earlier rise continue to shape his circumstances, and each movement now carries weight not just for him, but for those who depend on him. The next stage will show how Saul responds to these developments and how the pursuit begins to intensify, affecting not only David but also those who interact with him. While David is organizing his movements and leading a growing group, Saul's response becomes more aggressive and far-reaching. The pursuit is no longer limited to tracking David's location. It begins to affect anyone suspected of assisting him. This matters because the conflict expands beyond to individuals and starts impacting the wider structure of the nation. Saul gathers his officials and expresses frustration, accusing them of disloyalty for not informing him about David's actions. This reveals a shift in Saul's leadership from external threats to internal suspicion. At this point, Doeg the Edomite reports what he saw at Nob, describing how the priest Ahimelech provided David with food and a weapon. This information triggers a severe reaction. Saul summons Ahimelech and the priests, questioning their actions. Ahimelech responds by explaining that David had previously been a trusted servant of the king, and there was no indication that helping him would be considered a crime. This response is factual and grounded in past reality, but it does not change Saul's decision. Saul orders the execution of the priests. His own guards refuse to carry out the command, which is significant because it shows that even within Saul's immediate circle, there are limits to what they are willing to do. However, Doeg steps forward and executes the order, killing the priests and extending the violence to the entire city of Nob, including families and livestock. This event marks a major escalation. It is not a targeted action, it is a complete destruction of a community. This matters because it demonstrates how far Saul's response has moved beyond proportional action. One priest, Abiathar, escapes and reaches David, informing him of what happened. David immediately recognizes the connection between his presence at Nob and the outcome. He acknowledges that Doeg's presence at the time made this result possible. This moment is critical because it introduces a direct consequence of David's earlier decision. Even though his intent was survival, the result affected others in a severe way. David responds by offering protection to Abiathar, integrating him into his group. This adds a new element to David's structure, a priest who will remain with him moving forward. Soon after, David receives information that the city of Keilah is under attack by the Philistines. This presents a decision point. Engaging in this situation would mean exposing his location while still being pursued by Saul. David seeks guidance before acting and is instructed to go and defend the city. He initially hesitates due to the risk, but after confirmation, he leads his men into Keilah and defeats the Philistines, securing the area and recovering resources for the city. This action is important because it shows that David is not operating solely in self-preservation. Even while being hunted, he engages in actions that benefit the broader population. However, this decision also creates a new vulnerability. Saul learns that David is in Keilah and interprets this as an opportunity. He prepares to move against the city, expecting to trap David inside its walls. This matters because it shows how quickly David's actions can shift from advantage to risk. David responds by seeking information again, specifically asking whether the people of Keilah will hand him over to Saul if he stays. The answer is clear: they will. This is a critical moment because it demonstrates that even those he helps may not be able to protect him when faced with pressure from Saul. As a result, David leaves Keilah before Saul arrives. This decision prevents a direct confrontation but reinforces the reality that he cannot rely on fixed locations or public support for safety. From this point, David moves into the wilderness of Ziph, continuing to operate in areas that provide natural cover but limited stability. Saul continues the pursuit, actively searching for him. The text emphasizes that despite Saul's efforts, he is not able to locate David. This ongoing pursuit without resolution increases tension and forces David to remain mobile, adjusting constantly to avoid capture. During this period, Jonathan seeks out David and meets him in the wilderness. This meeting is significant because it reinforces their earlier alliance under new conditions. Jonathan acknowledges David's future position and reaffirms his support, even though it places him in opposition to his father's intentions. This interaction strengthens David's position internally, even as external pressure continues. However, the environment remains unstable. The Ziphites, local inhabitants of the area, inform Saul of David's location, offering to assist in his capture. This action highlights A recurring pattern information about David's movements is not contained, and local populations may cooperate with Saul for their own reasons. As a result, Saul intensifies his search, bringing his forces closer to David's position. At one point, Saul nearly closes the distance. The pursuit reaches a moment where capture seems imminent. However, an urgent message arrives, informing Saul of a Philistine raid in another area, forcing him to withdraw. This interruption is not planned by David, but it directly affects the outcome. It allows David to escape a situation that had become critical. By the end of this phase, the pattern is clear. David moves, engages, withdraws, and adapts, while Saul pursues, reacts, and escalates. The conflict is no longer limited to isolated events. It is continuous and expanding. The consequences of each decision are immediate and often extend beyond the initial situation. The next stage will show how this pursuit leads to direct encounters between David and Saul, where the outcome will depend not only on strategy, but on restraint and choice under pressure. The pattern of pursuit continues, but now it reaches a point where David and Saul come into direct proximity. David is in the wilderness of En-Gedi, a region filled with rocky terrain and natural caves. This matters because these locations provide concealment, but they also reduce distance between those hiding and those searching. Movement becomes more controlled, and encounters can happen without warning. Saul enters the area with a selected group of soldiers, focused specifically on locating David. During the search, Saul goes into a cave to rest, unaware that David and his men are hidden deeper inside. This creates a critical moment. For the first time, David has a complete positional advantage. The situation is not uncertain. Saul is vulnerable, and the outcome could be decided immediately. David's men interpret this as a clear opportunity. From their perspective, eliminating Saul would end the pursuit and remove the threat permanently. This is a practical conclusion based on their circumstances. However, David does not act on that reasoning. Instead, he approaches Saul quietly and cuts off a piece of his robe without harming him. This action matters because it demonstrates two things at the same time. First, David proves that he had full access and capability to kill Saul. Second, he establishes a boundary he chooses not to cross. He still recognizes Saul as the current king and decides not to act directly against him, even under pressure and with clear advantage. After Saul leaves the cave, David reveals himself from a distance. He calls out, shows the piece of the robe, and explains what happened. The message is direct. He had the opportunity to act, but chose not to. This shifts the immediate dynamic. Saul responds by acknowledging David's restraint and admits that David acted more justly in that moment. However, this recognition does not resolve the situation. Saul expresses emotion and even concedes that David will likely become king in the future, but he does not step down or remove the threat. This matters because it shows that acknowledgement does not produce structural change. The pursuit may pause, but it is not finished. This encounter establishes a consistent pattern that will define David's path forward. He will have opportunities to end the conflict by force, but he will choose restraint instead. These decisions are not isolated. They accumulate and shape how his future leadership will be perceived, especially in terms of legitimacy. By the end of this phase, the conflict has moved beyond simple pursuit. It now includes a moral dimension, where David's actions under pressure are as significant as the outcomes themselves. This prepares the ground for another direct encounter, where the same decision will be tested again under even more controlled conditions. After the encounter in En-Gedi, the conflict pauses but does not end. Saul returns home, yet the underlying tension remains unchanged. This matters because the pursuit is no longer just about location. It is rooted in Saul's perception, which has not shifted permanently. During this period, Samuel dies, removing a key figure who had once guided both king and future king. With him gone, there is no central authority moderating the situation. David continues moving through the wilderness and soon faces another decision involving a man named Nabal. After being denied support despite prior protection, David prepares to act violently. This is a turning point, because unlike previous restraint with Saul, his initial response here is immediate retaliation. However, Abigail intervenes, bringing provisions and preventing the attack. David accepts her reasoning and withdraws. This matters because it shows that his judgment is not automatic. It can be corrected before consequences unfold. Shortly after, a second encounter with Saul occurs. David infiltrates Saul's camp at night and again has the opportunity to kill him. Instead, he takes Saul's spear and leaves. As before, he proves his restraint from a distance. The pattern is now clear. David will not take the throne by force. Act 4. Between two worlds. At this point, David reaches a strategic conclusion. Remaining inside the territory of Israel is no longer sustainable. The pattern has become predictable. His location is exposed. Local populations inform Saul, and each movement increases the risk of capture. This matters because, for the first time, David is not just reacting to danger. He is changing his operating environment entirely. David decides to move into Philistine territory, specifically to Gath, under King Achish. This is a calculated risk. Previously, entering Gath nearly cost him his life, but now the situation is different. David is no longer alone. He leads a group of men, and his position is more defined. By aligning with Achish, he places himself outside Saul's immediate reach. This decision works in the short term, because Saul stops actively pursuing him once he is no longer within Israelite territory. Achish receives David and grants him a place to live in Ziklag. This matters because it provides David with something he has not had for a long time: stability. Ziklag becomes a base of operations where David can organize his men, manage resources, and plan movements without constant displacement. However, this stability comes with a condition: David is now operating under the authority of a foreign king. From this position, David begins conducting raids. The text specifies that these raids target groups such as the Amalekites and others in surrounding regions. After each raid, David reports back to Achish, but he does not provide full transparency about his targets. Instead, he frames his actions in a way that leads Achish to believe he is acting against Israelite territories. This detail is important because it shows a shift in David's strategy. He is now managing perception intentionally. This dual positioning defines this phase. On one side, David is living under Philistine protection. On the other, he is acting in ways that do not align with Philistine interests. This matters because it creates a situation where his survival depends not only on action, but on maintaining a controlled narrative. If Achish were to fully understand David's movements, the arrangement could collapse immediately. Over time, Achish develops trust in David, believing that his actions have distanced him permanently from Israel. This perception strengthens David's position within Philistine territory, but it also increases the stakes. The more trust Achish places in him, the more difficult it becomes for David to navigate both sides without exposure. By the end of this phase, David is no longer being pursued directly by Saul, but his situation has become more complex. He has gained stability, but at the cost of operating within a system that requires careful balance and controlled information. This sets up the next stage, where David will be placed in a position that forces a decision, whether to act openly alongside the Philistines or find a way to avoid that alignment without losing his position. The situation begins to escalate when the Philistines organize a large-scale military campaign against Israel. This is not a localized raid or border conflict. It is a coordinated mobilization of multiple Philistine rulers preparing for a decisive confrontation. Armies gather, positions are defined, and the objective is clear: direct engagement with Israel's forces. This matters because, for the first time, David is placed in a position where his alignment will be tested openly, not indirectly. Achish includes David and his men in the mobilization. He expresses confidence in David, assigning him a role within his forces and indicating that he expects him to fight alongside them. From Achish's perspective, David has demonstrated consistent loyalty during his time in Philistine territory. His reports, his actions, and his presence have all reinforced the idea that he has separated himself from Israel. However, for David, this situation creates a direct conflict. Participating in this battle would mean actively fighting against his own people, something that would carry long-term consequences for his future position. As the Philistine army advances and gathers in formation, tension develops among the other commanders. They begin to question David's presence, not based on emotion, but on strategic reasoning. They recall his past, his victories, and the fact that his reputation was built within Israel. Their concern is immediate and practical. In the middle of battle, David could turn against them to regain favor with Saul. This possibility introduces risk at a critical moment where coordination and trust are essential. The commanders bring their objection directly to Achish, insisting that David should not be allowed to go with them into battle. Achish responds by defending David, stating that since the day he arrived, he has found no fault in him. This exchange highlights a key difference in evaluation. Achish judges based on recent behavior and personal experience, while the other leaders assess risk based on long-term identity and history. Both perspectives are logical, but they lead to different conclusions. Despite Achish's defense, the pressure from the other Philistine rulers becomes decisive. They refuse to proceed with David included, making it clear that his presence is unacceptable. This forces Achish to comply, even though it goes against his own judgment. When he speaks to David, he does so with a tone of respect, emphasizing that the decision is not based on mistrust from his side, but on the demands of the other commanders. This moment resolves a situation that had no simple outcome. If David had gone into battle, he would have faced a decision with significant consequence: either fight against Israel or turn against the Philistines during the conflict. Both options carried risk. Instead, the decision made by the Philistine leaders removes him from that position entirely. David and his men are instructed to return to Ziklag. On the surface, this may appear as exclusion from a major operation, but in practical terms, it preserves his position without forcing a defining compromise. He remains in good standing with Achish, while avoiding direct involvement in a conflict that could have reshaped his future. By the end of this phase, the large-scale battle between the Philistines and Israel is imminent, and David is no longer part of it. However, this does not mean he is removed from consequence. The outcome of that battle will still affect the balance of power, and at the same time, a separate development is already unfolding, one that will directly impact his own base and the people under his command. When David and his men return to Ziklag, they expect to find stability, the same base they had left behind. Instead, they encounter a complete reversal. The city has been attacked, burned, and abandoned. There is no immediate resistance, no bodies in the streets, but the absence itself reveals what happened. Their families have been taken. Wives, children, and possessions are gone. This matters because, for the first time in this phase, the threat is not external positioning or political tension. It is direct loss, affecting every man under David's command. The attackers are identified as Amalekites, a group that had been targeted in previous raids. This connection is important because it introduces a cycle of action and consequence. While David had been conducting operations against surrounding groups, one of those groups has now responded in a way that strikes directly at his base. The conflict has become personal and immediate. The reaction among David's men is intense. They had followed him through uncertainty, displacement, and risk. But this situation shifts their focus. The loss of their families creates pressure, and that pressure turns toward David. The text states clearly that they begin to speak of stoning him. This is a critical moment because it shows that David's leadership is now under internal threat. The same group that formed around him is now considering turning against him. At this point, David is no longer dealing with a single external enemy. He is facing a breakdown of trust within his own structure. This matters because leadership under pressure is not only about defeating external threats, but also about maintaining cohesion when outcomes fail. David responds by stabilizing himself first. The text notes that he strengthens himself before making any decision, indicating a shift from reaction to controlled action. He then seeks direction before moving forward. This step is consistent with earlier patterns in his life when facing critical decisions. He pauses to determine the next move, rather than acting immediately under emotional pressure. The result is clear. He is instructed to pursue the attackers, with the expectation of recovery. David mobilizes his men quickly and begins the pursuit. However, not all are able to continue. A portion of the group is left behind due to exhaustion, while the rest move forward. This detail matters because it shows that even in urgent situations, operational limits affect execution. David adjusts without stopping the mission, maintaining momentum with the forces available. During the pursuit, they encounter an Egyptian servant who had been abandoned by the Amalek. After receiving care, the man provides critical information about the attackers' movements and location. This changes the situation from uncertain pursuit to targeted action. Intelligence replaces guesswork, increasing the likelihood of success. By the time David reaches the Amalekite camp, the situation is defined. The enemy is not in formation, they are scattered, celebrating their success. This creates an opportunity for a controlled strike. What follows will determine whether David can recover what was lost and restore stability within his group. The outcome of this confrontation will not only resolve the immediate crisis, but also re-establish David's authority among his men. David reaches the Amalekite camp with clear information and a defined objective. The enemy is not organized for defense, they are spread out, eating, drinking, and celebrating the success of their raid. This matters because it creates a tactical advantage. Instead of facing a structured force, David is dealing with a dispersed group that is not prepared for immediate resistance. He does not delay. He initiates the attack and maintains pressure throughout the engagement. The conflict extends over an extended period, continuing from daylight into the following day. This detail is important because it shows that the operation is not a single strike, but a sustained effort to ensure full recovery. The Amalekites attempt to escape, and some manage to do so, but the majority are overtaken. The outcome is clearly defined. David recovers everything that had been taken. There are no reported losses among the captives' families. Possessions and resources are all restored. This result is critical because it reverses the situation entirely. What began as total loss is turned into complete recovery. In addition to what was originally taken, David also secures additional livestock and goods from the Amalekite camp. This creates a secondary layer of outcome, not only restoration, but increase. However, this introduces a new internal issue. When David returns, a group among his men argues that those who stayed behind due to exhaustion should not receive a share of the recovered goods. Their reasoning is based on direct participation. They see the outcome as belonging only to those who completed the pursuit. David rejects this position. He establishes a clear rule. Those who stayed with the supplies will receive the same share as those who went into battle. This decision matters because it defines how his leadership operates under pressure. Distribution is not based solely on visible contribution in the final action, but on participation in the mission as a whole. This creates stability within the group and prevents division at a moment where unity is critical. He then takes a further step that goes beyond immediate necessity. David sends portions of the recovered goods to elders and leaders in various towns of Judah. This is not required for survival or internal cohesion, it is a strategic decision. Bidoin Taisi reinforces relationships within the territory that will later become central to his position. This matters because it shows that David is no longer operating only in response to events. He is beginning to act with awareness of future alignment and influence. At this point, the immediate crisis has been resolved. His men are restored, his authority is re-established, and his position is stabilized. However, the broader situation has been developing independently while he was focused on this recovery. The Philistines have already engaged Israel in the large-scale battle that David was removed from earlier. The outcome of that battle changes the entire structure of power. Saul and his sons are killed, and the Israelite army is defeated. This is not a gradual transition, it is a sudden collapse of leadership at the highest level. The king is gone, the royal line is disrupted, and the territory is left exposed. This matters because it creates a shift that David did not initiate, but must now respond to. For the first time, the position he was anointed for is no longer occupied. The long period of pursuit, exile, and survival reaches a turning point, not because David forced it, but because the existing structure has fallen. By the end of this act, David is no longer just surviving outside the system. The system itself has changed. What comes next is no longer about escape. It is about transition into power. Act 5, the transition of power. The shift from exile to leadership does not happen instantly. Even though Saul is dead and the central authority has collapsed, David does not assume power by default. This matters because the transition is not automatic. It requires recognition, alignment, and timing. David is still in Ziklag when a messenger arrives with confirmation of the battle's outcome. The report is direct. Israel has fled, Saul is dead, and his sons, including Jonathan, have also been killed. The messenger presents physical evidence, Saul's crown and armlet, claiming that he himself ended Saul's life at the king's request. This detail is important because it introduces a claim that could be interpreted as service or loyalty under battlefield conditions. However, David does not accept that framing. Instead, he responds with mourning. He tears his clothes, and his men do the same. They fast and grieve for Saul, Jonathan, and the people of Israel. This reaction matters because it defines David's position publicly. He does not celebrate the removal of Saul, even though it benefits him directly. After the period of mourning, David addresses the messenger again. He asks how the man was not afraid to strike the king, identified as the Lord's anointed. The response does not change David's conclusion. He orders the execution of the messenger. This action is significant because it reinforces a principle that David has followed consistently. He does not legitimize the killing of Saul, even after Saul's death. This establishes a clear boundary that will influence how his leadership is perceived moving forward. David then composes a lament for Saul and Jonathan, instructing that it be taught among the people. This is not a private expressnet. Is structured and shared. The content emphasizes the strength and role of both figures, focusing on their contributions rather than their failures. This matters because it shapes collective memory at a critical moment. Instead of allowing the narrative to become one of a replacement, David reinforces continuity and respect for what came before. At these points, David does not move immediately to claim the throne over all Israel. Instead, he seeks direction on where to go next. The response is specific. He is to go to Hebron, a city within the territory of Judah. This decision is strategic. Hebron is not the capital of a unified kingdom. It is a regional center within a tribe that already has ties to David. This indicates that the transition will begin at a local level, not through immediate national control. David relocates with his men and their families to Hebron. The leaders of Judah come to him and formally anoint him as king over the house of Judah. This marks his first official position as king, but it is limited in scope. He is not yet recognized by all Israel. This matters because it establishes a divided structure. David rules in Judah, while the rest of Israel does not immediately align with him. At the same time, another development occurs. Abner, the commander of Saul's army, installs Ishbosheth, one of Saul's surviving sons, as king over Israel. This creates a parallel authority. Instead of a unified transition, there are now two centers of power, David in Hebron, and Ishbosheth, representing Saul's line in the northern territories. This division defines the next phase. The question is no longer whether David will become king, it is how and when full recognition will take place. The process will involve conflict, negotiation, and gradual alignment, rather than immediate consolidation. By the end of this phase, David has moved from exile into a defined leadership position, but the kingdom itself remains divided. The transition has begun, but it is not complete. What follows will show how this division leads to direct conflict between the two houses and how David's position strengthens over time while the alternative structure begins to weaken. The division between David's rule in Judah and Ishbosheth's rule over the rest of Israel does not remain passive. It develops into a structured conflict, shaped largely by the actions of two military leaders: Joab, who commands David's forces, and Abner, who leads the forces supporting Ishbosheth. This matters because the struggle for power is not initially driven by the kings themselves, but by those managing military control on their behalf. The first direct confrontation occurs at Gibeon. Both sides meet near a pool, and instead of engaging immediately in full battle, a limited contest is proposed. Selected men from each side fight in pairs. However, this controlled engagement quickly escalates into a broader conflict. The result is a full battle, and David's forces gain the advantage. This outcome is important because it establishes an early shift in momentum. While the kingdom is still divided, the balance of strength is beginning to favor David. During this conflict, a key event occurs involving Abner and Asahel, one of Joab's brothers. Asahel pursues Abner aggressively, attempting to strike him down. Abner warns him to stop, recognizing that killing him would create long-term consequences. Asahel refuses to disengage, and Abner kills him himself. This moment matters because it introduces a personal dimension into the conflict. What was initially a political and military struggle now includes a direct grievance that will influence future actions. Despite the ongoing tension, Abner eventually calls for a stop to the fighting, recognizing that continued conflict will only increase losses without resolving the division. Joab agrees, and both sides withdraw. This pause does not end the conflict, but it slows its immediate escalation. The situation remains unresolved, with both houses continuing to exist in parallel. Over time, the text describes a clear trend. David's position grows stronger, while the house of Saul becomes weaker. This is not presented as a single event, but as a gradual process. David's leadership stabilizes Judah, and his influence expands, while internal weaknesses begin to appear within Ishbosheth's structure. This matters because it shows that the transition of power is not determined by one decisive battle, but by sustained imbalance over time. A critical turning point occurs when a dispute arises between Ishbosheth and Abner. Ishbosheth accuses Abner of acting improperly by taking a concubine of Saul. In that cultural context, this accusation implies a claim to authority. Abner reacts strongly, interpreting the accusation as a challenge to his loyalty and position. This conflict matters because Abner is the primary support behind Ishbosheth's rule. If that support breaks, the structure holding the northern kingdom together becomes unstable. Abner responds by shifting his allegiance. He initiates contact with David, offering to bring the rest of Israel under David's rule. This is a decisive moment. Instead of continued conflict, a path opens for consolidation through agreement. David accepts the proposal, but sets a condition: the return of Michal, Saul's daughter, and David's wife. This request is not only personal, it reinforces his connection to Saul's line, strengthening his legitimacy. Abner proceeds to negotiate with the elders of Israel, presenting David as the natural leader moving forward. This indicates that the transition is no longer only military, it is becoming political and collective. However, before this process can be completed, another development interrupts it. Joab, acting on the unresolved grievance over his brother's death, kills Abner. This action is not ordered by David. It is carried out independently, driven by personal retaliation. This matters because it complicates the transition. The individual who was facilitating unity is removed, and the process is disrupted at a critical moment. David responds publicly by distancing himself from the act. He declares that he is not responsible for Abner's death and honors Abner with mourning. This reaction is important because it preserves David's position in the eyes of the people. He does not allow the action of one commander to define his leadership or intentions. By the end of this phase, The structure supporting Ishbosheth is weakened significantly. The loss of Abner removes its main source of stability, while David's position continues to strengthen both politically and publicly. The transition is now moving toward completion, but it will not happen without further disruption. After Abner's death, the balance of power shifts more rapidly. The structure supporting Ishbosheth is no longer stable, because its primary military and political support has been removed. This matters because Ishbosheth had depended heavily on Abner to maintain control. Without him, his position becomes exposed, both internally and externally. The text describes Ishbosheth's reaction as one of fear. His confidence declines, and the broader population of Israel is affected as well. This is important because leadership at this level depends not only on authority, but on the perception of stability. Once that perception weakens, the structure begins to collapse from within. David, on the other hand, remains in Hebron, continuing to govern Judah without direct involvement in the instability developing in the north. At this point, two men Rechab and Bona identify an opportunity. They are leaders of raiding bands under Ishbosheth's authority, and they decide to act independently. They enter Ishbosheth's house during the day, when he is resting, and kill him. Afterward, they take his head and travel to Hebron, presenting it to David. Their expectation is clear. They believe that eliminating David's rival will be seen as a service and rewarded. This moment parallels the earlier situation with the messenger who claimed to have killed Saul. Again, someone attempts to position themselves as useful by removing a perceived obstacle. However, David responds in the same way he did before. He does not accept the act as loyalty or service. Instead, he frames it as the killing of a righteous man in his own house, under conditions that provided no defense. David orders the execution of both men. This decision reinforces a consistent principle in his leadership. He does not legitimize the removal of authority through assassination, even when it benefits him directly. This matters because it shapes how his rise to power is viewed. His authority is not established through endorsement of opportunistic violence, but through controlled and deliberate transition. With Ishbosheth gone, there is no longer a competing king from Saul's line with effective authority. The northern tribes are now without centralized leadership. This creates a vacuum that must be filled, but it also removes the primary obstacle that had delayed David's full recognition. The division between Judah and the rest of Israel no longer has a defined structure to maintain it. At this stage, the transition is no longer about conflict between two houses. It becomes a question of collective decision. The elders of Israel approach David at Hebron, acknowledging both his past role and his continued leadership. They reference his history as a leader even during Saul's reign, recognizing that he had already been functioning in a capacity that extended beyond Judah. This matters because the recognition is not forced, it is presented as alignment. The tribes of Israel come to David rather than being overtaken by him. This changes the nature of the transition from conquest to acceptance. David makes a covenant with them, formalizing the relationship, and is anointed as king over all Israel. By the end of this phase, the divided structure has been resolved. David is no longer king of Judah. Aloni now holds unified authority over the entire nation. The long process that began with private anointing, continued through exile and conflict, has reached a structural completion. However, becoming king over all Israel does not mean stability is guaranteed. The next phase will show that consolidation of power brings new challenges, including the need to establish a central capital and manage a unified territory. With Ishbosheth gone and the northern tribes without a central authority, the transition reaches its final stage. The elders of Israel come to David at Hebron, not as opponents, but as representatives of a collective decision. They acknowledge three key elements: their shared identity with him, his demonstrated leadership even during Saul's reign, and the recognition that he is now the appropriate figure to unify the nation. This matters because the shift in power is not enforced through conquest, is confirmed through agreement. David formalizes this transition by making a covenant with the elders. This is a structured act that defines the relationship between king and people, establishing expectations on both sides. Following this, David is anointed as king over all Israel. At this point, the division that had defined the previous phase is resolved. The long process that began privately, continued through exile and conflict, now reaches a public and political completion. However, gaining authority is only the first step. Governing a unified territory requires a new level of organization and control. One of David's first major decisions is the selection of a central capital. Hebron had served as a base, but it is limited geographically and politically tied to Judah. David identifies Jerusalem as a more strategic option. The city is located between tribal territories and is not strongly associated with any single tribe. This matters because it allows David to establish a neutral center, reducing internal competition and reinforcing unity. At the time, Jerusalem is controlled by the Jebusites, who consider their defenses strong enough to resist attack. Their confidence is based on the city's natural fortifications. However, David leads a targeted operation and successfully captures it. This victory is significant not only for its military outcome, but for what follows. David establishes Jerusalem as the political center of his kingdom and begins to develop it as a permanent seat of power. Once established in Jerusalem, David begins consolidating his rule. He strengthens the city, organizes administrative structures, and expands his influence. The text also notes that his position continues to grow stronger, indicating a period of increasing stability. However, this consolidation does not go unnoticed. External forces begin to respond to the new reality. The Philistines, who had previously dealt with a divided Israel, now face a unified kingdom under a single leader. They move to challenge this development, initiating military action against David. This is a critical moment because it tests whether David's authority is limited to internal recognition or can withstand external pressure. David responds by engaging in these confrontations and securing victories. These outcomes reinforce his position and demonstrate that his leadership extends beyond internal consolidation to effective national defense. At the same time, David begins to take steps that go beyond military and political control. He initiates actions that will shape the identity of the kingdom, including plans related to the movement of the Ark of the Covenant. This signals a transition toward integrating religious and political authority, though this process will develop further in the next phase. By the end of this act, David is fully established as king over all Israel, with a centralized capital, expanding influence, and confirmed authority both internally and externally. The transition of power is no longer in question. What follows will shift the focus from gaining and securing authority to managing its consequences. The next phase will show that stability at the national level introduces new challenges that cannot be resolved through strategy or strength alone. Act 6: Power, Expansion, and Internal Fracture. With the kingdom unified and Jerusalem established as the central capital, David enters a new phase where the primary challenge is no longer gaining authority, but structuring and sustaining it. This matters because leadership at this level requires more than military success. It demands organization, continuity, and integration of different aspects of national life. David begins by focusing on consolidation, ensuring that the newly unified tribes operate under a coordinated system rather than remaining loosely connected. One of his first major actions in this phase is the decision to bring the Ark of the Covenant to Jerusalem. The Ark had been kept outside the central political structure, and its relocation is both symbolic and practical. This matters because it connects religious identity directly to the political center, reinforcing Jerusalem not only as a seat of government, but also as a focal point of worship. The movement of the Ark is organized as a public event, involving large participation and structured procession. However, the first attempt does not go as planned. During the transport, the Ark is placed on a cart, and when it becomes unstable, a man named Uzzah reaches out to steady it. The text records that he is struck down immediately. This moment interrupts the process and introduces a clear boundary regarding how the Ark is to be handled. David responds by stopping the operation and temporarily placing the Ark in the house of Abit. This matters because it shows that even in a period of consolidation, there are limits that cannot be ignored, and missteps carry immediate consequences. After a period of time, and with a revised approach that aligns with established instructions, David resumes the process and successfully brings the Ark into Jerusalem. This second attempt is carefully structured, and the outcome is stable. David participates actively in the event, and the Ark is placed within the city. This marks the completion of an important objective. Jerusalem is now both the political and religious center of the kingdom. At the same time, David's external position continues to strengthen. He engages in multiple campaigns against surrounding groups, including the Philistines and other neighboring nations. The outcomes are consistently in his favor, and the territory under his control expands. This matters because it establishes security around the kingdom's borders, reducing immediate external threats and increasing resources. As David's position stabilizes, he begins to establish administrative structures. Officials are appointed, roles are defined, and governance becomes more organized. This transition from movement to structure is critical because it determines whether the kingdom can function beyond the presence of a single leader. David's rule is no longer based only on personal leadership, but is supported by systems that manage different aspects of national life. However, even as stability increases externally and structurally, internal dynamics begin to shift. David's household grows, and with it, complexity. Multiple relationships, alliances, and family lines are established. This matters because internal structure at the family level will later intersect with political stability. What appears as expansion at this stage will introduce complications in the next phase. By the end of this part, David's kingdom is secure, centralized, and expanding. The major systems are in place, and his authority is recognized both internally and externally. However, the same period that establishes strength also sets conditions for future tension. What follows will show that the next challenges do not come from outside the kingdom, but from within it. With the kingdom stabilized and expanding, David enters a period where his decisions are no longer shaped by survival or immediate threat. This matters because the absence of external pressure changes the conditions under which choices are made. Instead of reacting to danger, David is now operating from a position of control, and this shift will directly influence the next sequence of events. The text introduces a transition point with a simple observation. At a time when kings typically go out to war, David remains in Jerusalem. This detail is important because it marks a departure from his previous pattern. Up to this point, David has been actively involved in campaigns, leading from the front. Now, he delegates that responsibility to his commanders, particularly Joab, while he stays behind in the capital. During this period, David observes a woman bathing from the roof of his house. He inquires about her identity and learns that she is Bathsheba, the wife of Uriah, one of his soldiers. This information establishes a clear boundary. She is not unattached, and her connection to one of David's own men is explicit. Despite this, David sends for her, and the interaction results in her becoming pregnant. This moment is critical because it represents a decision made without external pressure, based entirely on personal choice. Once the situation becomes known, David moves to manage the consequence, rather than address the action directly. He recalls Uriah from the battlefield, intending for him to return to his home, so that the pregnancy might be attributed to him. However, Uriah does not follow that expectation. He refuses to go home while the army remains in the field, choosing instead to stay with the king's servants. This response is significant because it contrasts with David's position. Uriah maintains a sense of duty aligned with the conditions of war, while David is operating outside of that context. David makes a second attempt, inviting Uriah to eat and drink with him, hoping to influence his decision. Even under these conditions, Uriah does not change his behavior. This creates a situation where David's initial plan fails. Instead of reversing course, he escalates. He sends Uriah back to the battlefield with a letter instructing Joab to place him in a position where he will be exposed and then withdraw support. This is a calculated decision designed to ensure Uriah's death under the appearance of normal combat. Joab carries out the instruction, and Uriah is killed during the engagement. The report is delivered back to David, and the explanation is framed within the context of battle losses. David responds in a way that treats the outcome as part of the expected risk of warfare. This matters because it shows a shift in how he processes events. What is presented externally as a battlefield casualty is internally the result of a deliberate decision. After a period of mourning, David brings Bathsheba into his house, and she becomes his wife. From an external perspective, the situation appears resolved. The sequence of events has been managed in a way that aligns with visible norms loss in battle, followed by however. The text introduces a clear statement that reframes the entire situation. What David has done is not viewed as acceptable. This moment marks a turning point. Up to this stage, David's decisions under pressure had reinforced his position and legitimacy. Here, the decision is made without pressure and introduces a consequence that will not be immediate, but will unfold over time. The next phase will show how this action is confronted directly and how the consequences begin to affect not only David personally, but the structure of his household and kingdom. The situation does not remain unaddressed. A direct confrontation follows, initiated by the prophet Nathan. Instead of presenting the accusation immediately, Nathan approaches David with a case. A wealthy man takes a single lamb from a poor man. Despite having many of his own, David reacts strongly to the scenario, judging the action as unjust and deserving of consequence. This setup matters because it leads David to issue a judgment before recognizing that he is the subject of it. Nathan then makes the connection explicit. He identifies David as the one who committed the act, outlining the sequence taking Bathsheba and arranging Uriah's death. The confrontation is direct and leaves no ambiguity. This moment is critical because it shifts the situation from concealed action to acknowledged wrongdoing. David does not deny it. He responds with a clear admission, accepting responsibility without attempting to justify his decisions. Nathan confirms that David will not be removed as king, but he also states that consequences will follow. These consequences are not immediate removal from power, but ongoing effects within his household. This matters because it establishes that the impact of David's decision will unfold over time rather than through a single event. The structure of his leadership remains intact, but internal stability is now affected. The first consequence is immediate. The child born from the situation becomes ill. David responds by fasting and remaining on the ground, seeking a reversal. His actions during this period show a return to dependence rather than control. However, the outcome does not change. The child dies. When informed, David stops fasting, washes, and resumes normal activity. This response is notable because it reflects acceptance after the outcome is finalized. The sequence demonstrates a shift from attempt to influence to recognition of a fixed result. After this, Bathsheba later gives birth to another son, Solomon. The text notes that this child is accepted and will later play a central role. This detail is important because it shows that the line of succession continues. But the earlier event is not arrested, remains part of the context shaping what follows. The consequences then move beyond the immediate situation into David's broader household. One of his sons, Amnon, commits an act against his half-sister Tamar. This event introduces internal conflict that David does not resolve decisively. His response is described as anger, but no action is taken to address the situation. This lack of intervention matters because it creates conditions for further escalation. Absalom, Tamar's full brother, waits and later kills Amnon in response. This act introduces a new phase of internal instability. What began as a concealed decision at the top level now results in violence within the family. The structure that had been established externally begins to fracture internally. Absalom then leaves and remains away for a period before eventually returning. However, the relationship between him and David is not fully restored. This unresolved tension becomes the basis for future conflict. The pattern is now clear. The consequences of David's earlier decision are not isolated. They are expanding across time and affecting multiple levels of his household. By the end of this phase, David's authority remains intact, but internal cohesion has been weakened. The issues are no longer external threats or political divisions. They are rooted within his own family, where control is limited and outcomes are harder to manage. What follows will show how this internal instability develops into open rebellion and how David responds when the threat comes from within his own house. The internal tension that began within David's household develops into an organized political movement through Absalom. After returning to Jerusalem, Absalom does not initiate rebellion immediately. Instead, he builds influence over time. He positions himself at the city gate, the place where legal matters are brought for judgment, and begins interacting directly with the people. He listens to their disputes, acknowledges their concerns, and gradually introduces a consistent message that the current system is insufficient, and that under his leadership, their cases would be handled more effectively. This matters because Absalom is not gaining support through force, but through perception and accessibility. This strategy produces measurable results. The text indicates that Absalom steals the hearts of the people of Israel, meaning that loyalty begins to shift without formal declaration. Over time, this informal support becomes a stable base. Once that foundation is in place, Absalom moves to the next phase. He requests permission from David to go to Hebron, presenting it as the fulfillment of a vow. David allows it, unaware that this request is part of a larger plan. In Hebron, Absalom activates the rebellion. Messengers are sent throughout the tribes, signaling that he has been declared king. This is not a spontaneous uprising. It is coordinated. Support gathers quickly, including individuals with experience and influence. Among them is Ahithophel, one of David's trusted advisors. This detail is critical because it shows that the rebellion is not only popular, it is strategically informed from within David's own system. When David receives the report, he recognizes the seriousness of the situation immediately. He does not attempt to defend Jerusalem through direct confrontation. Instead, he orders a rapid withdrawal, leaving the city with those who remain loyal to him. This decision is strategic. Engaging in battle within the city would risk widespread destruction and civilian casualties. By leaving, David preserves both the city and the possibility of reorganizing his forces. As David departs, the division within the kingdom becomes visible. Some follow him, while others remain or align with Absalom. David organizes his movement carefully, assigning commanders and structuring his forces, even in retreat. He also places trusted individuals within Jerusalem to act as informants, ensuring that he continues to receive updates about Absalom's actions. This matters because it shows that David's withdrawal is not a loss of control, it is a repositioning. The conflict moves toward direct engagement, and David divides his forces into groups under Joab and other commanders. Before the battle begins, he gives a specific and unusual instruction: deal gently with Absalom. This order introduces a personal constraint within a military operation. The objective is not only victory, but preservation of his son. This creates a tension between strategic necessity and personal intent. During the battle, David's forces gain the advantage. The terrain plays a role, and Absalom's army becomes disorganized. As Absalom attempts to escape, he is caught in a vulnerable position, suspended by his hair in a tree. One of the soldiers reports this to Joab instead of acting directly. Joab responds by taking action himself, killing Absalom despite David's explicit instruction. This moment is decisive. It ends the rebellion, but not in the way David intended. When David receives the news, his reaction is immediate and personal. He does not focus on the victory or the restoration of his authority. Instead, he mourns, expressing grief over Absalom's death. This response highlights the full cost of the conflict. The rebellion has been suppressed, but the internal fracture has resulted in irreversible loss. By the end of this act, David regains control of the kingdom, and the immediate threat is removed. However, the consequences of the earlier decisions, beginning with internal failures and extending through this rebellion, remain present. Authority is restored, but the stability of his household and the emotional weight of leadership have changed permanently. The next phase will move toward the closing period of David's life, where leadership continues, but under the accumulation of past decisions and their long-term effects. Act 7, the final years and last decisions. After the rebellion of Absalom is suppressed and David returns to Jerusalem, the kingdom is restored in structure, but not in full stability. This matters because authority has been regained, yet the underlying fractures remain present. The return itself is not immediate or universally supported. As David moves back toward the capital, different groups respond in different ways. Some come forward quickly to show loyalty, others hesitate, and some only realign after the outcome is clearly settled. This uneven response reveals that unity has been restored politically, but not fully secured at the level of trust. Judah, David's own tribe, takes the lead in bringing him back. They organize the process and publicly support his return. However, this creates tension with the other tribes of Israel, who feel excluded from the decision. They question why Judah acted first and without broader consultation. This matters because it exposes a recurring issue in David's reign. To balance between tribal identity and centralized authority is fragile. Even after years of unified rule, the sense of shared participation is not evenly distributed. This tension quickly becomes an opening for disruption. A man named Sheba, from the tribe of Benjamin, takes advantage of the moment. He declares a form of separation, calling the tribes away from David with a direct statement, rejecting shared leadership. This is not an isolated protest. It gains traction among a portion of the population. This matters because it shows that loyalty to David, while strong in some areas, is not absolute across all Israel. The kingdom, though unified in structure, is still vulnerable to division. David responds without delay. He assigns Amasa, who had previously been aligned with Absalom, to gather forces from Judah. This decision is strategic. By appointing Amasa, David is attempting to reintegrate former opposition into his leadership structure, reducing the risk of further division. However, Amasa delays in fulfilling the assignment. This delay is significant because in situations of emerging rebellion, time directly affects control. The longer the response takes, the more space the rebellion has to grow. Recognizing the urgency, David shifts responsibility back to Joab. This decision reflects a return to a proven, though complex, leader. Joab had been effective in previous conflicts, but his actions were not always aligned with David's instructions. Even so, David prioritizes immediate effectiveness over long-term control in this moment. Joab moves quickly to pursue Sheba, maintaining momentum and preventing the rebellion from expanding further. During this pursuit, another internal conflict emerges. Joab encounters Amasa and kills him, reasserting his own position as commander. This act is not publicly authorized, but it is decisive. It removes delay and consolidates military leadership under Joab again. This matters because it highlights a recurring pattern within David's structure. Individual actors continue to shape outcomes. Sometimes outside formal authority, control exists, but it is not absolute. Joab continues the pursuit and eventually tracks Sheba to a fortified city. The situation has the potential to become prolonged and destructive, as siege warfare would affect both the target and surrounding areas. However, the resolution comes through an unexpected channel. A woman from the city initiates communication with Joab, proposing a direct solution. Sheba is identified, executed by those inside the city, and his head is delivered to Joab. This ends the rebellion without extended conflict. This outcome is important because it shows that not all conflicts are resolved through direct military force. Strategic negotiation and localized decisions can produce faster and less destructive results. It also reinforces a pattern seen throughout David's life. Critical moments are often resolved through a combination of action and intervention, rather than through a single approach. Following this, David reestablishes administrative order. Positions are reaffirmed, responsibilities are defined, and the structure of governance continues. Military leadership, priestly roles, and civil administration are organized under clear authority. This matters because despite repeated internal disruptions, the system itself remains functional and adaptable. However, stability does not eliminate all problems. A prolonged famine begins, lasting several years. David seeks to understand the cause, and the issue is linked to a past violation during Saul's reign involving a broken covenant. This introduces a different type of challenge, non-immediate rebellion or military threat, but a consequence from a previous generation affecting the present. By the end of this phase, David remains in control, and the kingdom continues to function. But the pattern is consistent. Stability exists, yet it is repeatedly tested by internal division, leadership tensions, and consequences that extend beyond immediate decisions. The focus is now beginning to shift. The question is no longer only about maintaining control, but about what comes next. Who will lead after David, and how that transition will take place. As David advances in age, the focus of leadership begins to shift from active expansion and conflict management to continuity and succession. This matters because the stability of the kingdom is no longer defined only by current control, but by what will happen after David is no longer able to lead. The question is not theoretical. His condition becomes visible, and those within the kingdom begin to anticipate transition. The text describes David as physically weakened, unable to maintain warmth, indicating a decline that affects his daily function. This detail is important because it signals that his capacity to govern directly is limited. In response, a young woman named Abishag is brought to attend to him, providing care. While this does not change the structure of authority immediately, it highlights that David's role is shifting from active leadership to a more dependent state. At this point, the issue of succession becomes urgent. However, David does not immediately declare a successor. This absence of a clear public decision creates space for competing claims. One of David's sons, Adonijah, begins to position himself as the next king. He organizes support, gathers chariots and men, and aligns himself with key figures, including Joab and Abiathar, the priest. This matters because it shows that succession is not automatically determined. It is influenced by alliances and visible support. Adonijah hosts a gathering where he presents himself in a way that resembles a formal declaration. Notably, certain individuals are not invited, including Nathan the prophet, Zadok the priest, and Solomon. This selective inclusion is important because it reveals that the movement is not universally accepted within the leadership structure. There are clear divisions regarding who should succeed David. Nathan recognizes the risk and intervenes. He approaches Bathsheba, Solomon's mother, and outlines the situation. Together, they act to bring the matter directly to David. Bathsheba reminds David of a prior commitment that Solomon would be the one to succeed him. This interaction is critical because it brings the issue from indirect movement into direct decision. Nathan then enters and confirms the situation independently, ensuring that David understands the urgency and scope of what is happening. This coordinated approach matters because it provides David with both context and verification, prompting immediate action rather than delayed response. David responds by issuing a clear and public instruction. He orders that Solomon be placed on his own mule, taken to Gihon, and anointed as king by Zadok, the priest, and Nathan the prophet. This is not a private decision. It is carried out visibly, with public acknowledgement. The use of established figures and a defined location reinforces legitimacy and ensures that the transition is recognized. Solomon is anointed, and the announcement is made openly. The response among the people is immediate, creating a clear contrast with Adonijah's earlier gathering. This matters because it shifts the balance of authority quickly. What had been a developing claim is replaced by an officially recognized succession. When Adonijah and his supporters hear what has happened, the reaction is immediate. The gathering disperses, and those who had aligned with him withdraw. Adonijah himself seeks protection, recognizing that his position has changed. Solomon grants him conditional mercy, allowing him to live as long as he does not act against the established order. By the end of this phase, the issue of succession is no longer uncertain. David has made a definitive decision, and Solomon has been publicly established as the next king. The transition has begun while David is still alive, reducing the risk of conflict after his death. The final phase will show how David concludes his leadership, what instructions he leaves behind, and how the transition is completed. With Solomon publicly established as the next king, the transition moves from declaration to consolidation. This matters because a public anointing resolves uncertainty, but it does not automatically secure control. There are still individuals within the kingdom whose positions and past actions create potential instability. David, now near the end of his life, addresses this directly by giving final instructions to Solomon. David's guidance is structured and specific. He begins with a general directive to follow the established laws and maintain alignment with the commands that define Israel's leadership framework. This sets the foundation, emphasizing that long-term stability depends on adherence to a defined standard, not only on personal authority. However, David then moves into more detailed instructions concerning particular individuals. He addresses the case of Joab first. Joab had served as a military commander for years and had been effective in securing victories. However, he had also acted independently in critical moments, including the killings of Abner and Amasa. These actions were not authorized and had introduced instability into the leadership structure. David instructs Solomon not to allow Joab to remain without accountability. This matters because it shows that effectiveness in service does not remove responsibility for actions that disrupt order. David then turns to Shimei, who had previously cursed him during the period of Absalom's rebellion. Although David had chosen not to act against Shimei at that time, he now includes him in his final instructions. He does not order immediate action, but he advises Solomon to deal with him based on his behavior moving forward. This reflects that Patan David distinguishes between past restraint and future responsibility, leaving room for Solomon to act according to circumstances. At the same time, David instructs Solomon to show favor to the sons of Barzillai, who had supported him during his time in exile. This inclusion is important because it balances the directives. Not all final instructions are corrective, some are reinforcing relationships that contributed to stability. This matters because leadership involves both addressing threats and maintaining loyalty. After giving these instructions, David's role transitions fully. The text records that he dies after a long reign, having ruled over Judah and then all Israel. His death marks the end of a period that had included rise, exile, consolidation, expansion, and internal conflict. However, the transition of power does not stop at his death. It continues through the actions that follow. Solomon begins to act on the instructions given. The first situation involves Adonijah, who had previously attempted to position himself as king. He approaches Bathsheba with a request to marry Abat, the woman who had attended David. This request is interpreted as a renewed attempt to claim authority, because in that context, such an action could be seen as aligning with the former king's household in a way that suggests legitimacy. Solomon responds decisively. He orders Adonijah's execution, removing the possibility of renewed challenge. This action is significant because it establishes that the earlier mercy was conditional, and once that condition is broken, the response is immediate. It also signals that Solomon will not allow ambiguity in matters of succession. At this point, the process of consolidation is active. The transition from David to Solomon is no longer symbolic. It is being enforced through decisions that remove instability and reinforce centralized control. The final part will show how this process is completed, and how the kingdom moves fully into a new phase under Solomon's leadership. With David's death and Solomon firmly placed on the throne, the transition enters its final stage: consolidation of authority. This matters because a declared succession, even when publicly recognized, does not guarantee stability. The previous phase had already revealed how quickly influence can shift when leadership is not clearly enforced. Solomon understands that this moment will define the strength of his reign from the beginning. He begins by addressing those whose prior actions place them in positions of potential risk. The first is Abiathar the priest, who had supported Adniga during his attempt to claim the throne. Abiathar had served faithfully under David in earlier periods, and this history is taken into account. Instead of execution, Solomon removes him from his role, effectively ending his influence. This decision is important because it shows a measured response. Past loyalty is not ignored, but present alignment determines future position. Authority is preserved without unnecessary escalation. The situation with Joab is different. Joab had been a central figure throughout David's reign, securing military victories and maintaining operational control during critical moments. However, his pattern of acting independently, especially in the killings of Abner, Amasa, and later Absalom, had repeatedly challenged the structure of authority. By aligning himself with Adniga, Joab places himself in direct opposition to the established succession. When Joab recognizes the shift in power, he seeks refuge at the altar, appealing to tradition as a form of protection. This action reflects an understanding of established limits, but Solomon does not accept it as a sufficient safeguard. He orders that Joab be executed there. This moment is decisive. It signals that the new leadership will not allow precedent or position to override accountability. The removal of Joab ends a long-standing dynamic in which military power could operate alongside, and sometimes outside of, central authority. Solomon then addresses Shimei, whose earlier actions during David's flight had marked him as unstable in loyalty, instead of immediate punishment. Solomon establishes a controlled condition. Shimei is to remain within Jerusalem and not cross a defined boundary. This creates a test of compliance. For a time, Shimei follows the instruction, and the situation remains stable. However, when he later leaves the city for personal reasons, he breaks the condition that had been clearly set. This breach is reported, and Solomon responds without hesitation. The execution of Shimei reinforces a consistent pattern, and Solomon's approach conditions are not symbolic. They are binding. Once they are violated, the response is final. This matters because it removes ambiguity from his leadership. Expectations are defined clearly, and consequences are applied when those expectations are not met. Through these actions, Solomon systematically removes the remaining sources of instability. Each case is handled individually, based on prior behavior, current alignment, and potential risk. This is not a broad or reactive purge, it is a structured consolidation. Authority is not only established, it is clarified. The boundaries of power, loyalty, and accountability are made explicit. By the end of this process, the kingdom is fully under Solomon's control. The leadership structure is no longer divided, and the internal tensions that carried over from David's final years have been addressed. The transition that began decades earlier with David's anointing, his rise through conflict, his period of rule, and the challenges within his household reaches its structural completion here. At this point, David's presence remains only through what he built and what he left behind. His life cannot be reduced to a single defining moment. It was a sequence: election, growth, pressure, failure, correction, consequence, and legacy. Each phase shaped the next, and the final outcome reflects not only his strengths, but also how he responded when those strengths were tested. The kingdom now moves forward under a new leader, but it does so carrying the full weight of what came before. The foundation is established, but its future will depend on how it is sustained. A Hittite legacy and final reflection. With the transition complete and Solomon established as king, the narrative shifts from events to meaning. This matters because David's life is no longer unfolding, it is now being interpreted through its outcomes. The structure he helped build continues, but the focus turns to what his life represents within that structure. David's story does not follow a single direction. It begins with selection, moves through obscurity, raises into prominence, and then enters extended periods of pressure, conflict, and responsibility. What defines this trajectory is not consistency of circumstance, but continuity of movement. Each phase introduces different conditions, and David's responses within those conditions shape the next stage. This matters because his life cannot be understood by isolating a single moment, whether success or failure, but only by examining how those moments connect. One of the central patterns in David's life is the relationship between position and response. When he is without power, his actions are marked by restraint. He does not take the throne by force, even when the opportunity is available. This establishes a foundation for how his rise is perceived. However, once he is in a position of authority, the nature of his decisions changes. The incident with Bathsheba demonstrates that access to power introduces different risks. Decisions are no longer constrained by external pressure, but shaped by internal judgment. This contrast is critical. It shows that strength in one phase does not guarantee consistency in another. David's earlier restraint does not prevent later failure, and his later failure does not erase earlier alignment. Instead, both exist within the same structure. This matters because it creates a more complex model of leadership, one that includes both stability and vulnerability. Another defining element is the way consequences develop over time. Not all outcomes in David's life are immediate. Some are delayed, unfolding through his household and affecting relationships and internal structure. The events involving his sons, particularly the conflict that leads to Absalom's rebellion, illustrate how earlier decisions can extend into later stages. These consequences are not isolated. They interact with existing conditions, amplifying instability where it already exists. At the same time, David's responses to failure are part of the pattern. When confronted, he does not deny or deflect responsibility. He acknowledges the situation directly. This does not remove the consequences, but it affects how the situation develops afterward. This distinction is important because it separates the existence of failure from the handling of it. David's leadership also reflects a balance between structure and unpredictability. He establishes systems, military, administrative, and religious, that allow the kingdom to function beyond his personal presence. At the same time, many critical moments are shaped by unexpected events, individual actions, or interventions that are not part of a planned system. This combination means that his leadership is both organized and reactive. By the end of his life, David leaves behind more than a kingdom. He leaves a framework shaped by decisions made under different conditions, some aligned, some flawed, all consequential. His legacy is not defined by a single characteristic, but by the accumulation of responses across time. What follows will examine how this legacy continues to influence what comes next and how the structure he established is carried forward under new leadership. When David's life is viewed as a complete sequence, a consistent pattern becomes clear. His story is not defined by a single moment, but by the tension between calling, response, and consequence. This matters because it shifts the focus away from isolated events and toward continuity. David is not remembered only as the shepherd, the warrior, or the king, but as someone who moved through all these roles under changing conditions. At the beginning, his position is undefined, and his actions are shaped by dependence and restraint. He does not force outcomes. He waits, responds, and operates within limits. This establishes a foundation of alignment that defines how his rise is perceived. However, as his authority increases, the conditions change. Decisions are no longer restricted by external pressure, and this exposes a different level of responsibility. The incident with Bathsheba becomes a defining contrast, not because it is the only failure, but because it occurs at the height of his power. This contrast is central. It shows that position amplifies both strength and vulnerability. What is managed well under pressure may become unstable under control. This matters because it reframes leadership not as a fixed state, but as something that must be maintained across different environments. At the same time, David's life demonstrates that failure does not end the process, but it does alter it. His response to confrontation, acknowledgement rather than denial, does not remove consequences, but it changes the direction of what follows. The effects continue, particularly within his household, where instability develops into conflict. This shows that some outcomes cannot be contained or reversed. only carried forward. Another defining element is the relationship between individual action and long-term structure. David builds a kingdom that functions beyond his personal presence: military organization, administrative roles, and a centralized capital. These systems allow continuity under Solomon. However, alongside these structures, there are unresolved tensions that also continue. This dual legacy, stability and vulnerability, becomes part of what is passed on. David's story also establishes a model of leadership that is not based solely on control. His rise is gradual, involving recognition, alignment, and timing rather than direct seizure of power. Even in moments where he could have accelerated the process, he does not act outside of that framework. This matters because it defines legitimacy in a way that extends beyond force. By the end, David leaves behind more than a unified kingdom. He leaves a pattern, one that includes selection, growth, testing, failure, correction, and continuation. Each phase contributes to the final outcome, and none of them exist in isolation. The result is not a simplified legacy, but a complete one. A life where authority was given, tested, expanded, and ultimately transferred, carrying with it both what was built and what was learned along the way.